The air was thick with anticipation. For months, the corridors of Kensington Palace had echoed with silence more than ceremony, whispers more than formal declarations. But on this day, something was different. It wasn't the usual bustling energy that followed the royal couple's public engagements or the excited chatter from palace aides preparing for yet another event. No, this was something else, a quiet tension, the kind that coils itself tightly in the gut before a revelation. And at the center of it all stood William and Catherine, the Prince and Princess of Wales, poised to make a decision that would reverberate far beyond the palace walls. To the outside world, they had it all. 3 beautiful children. A marriage built not only on love, but on enduring respect and quiet perseverance. They were, in many ways, the monarchy's future, a steady, unshakable pair in a world riddled with instability. After the tremors left behind by Prince Harry's departure, the controversies surrounding Prince Andrew, and the ever-fading influence of the older royal generation, William and Catherine were the crown's answer to chaos. Dependable, present, unscathed. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates, which is why no one saw it coming. Not the tabloids that have made an industry out of speculation. Not the palace insiders who thought they had learned how to read between the most subtle of royal gestures. And not even some close family members who, for years, had assumed that the Wales family of 5 was complete. But the truth, as it turned out, was far more personal, far more complex, and above all, far more emotionally charged than any outsider could have imagined. In the days leading up to the announcement, Catherine had stepped back from her royal duties under the pretense of needing rest. It wasn't entirely false, but the real story behind that decision had been carefully guarded. William, ever the protector, had kept the circle tight. Aides were shuffled. Appointments were rescheduled. Public appearances were either pre-recorded or postponed. The press tried to fill the vacuum with speculation, most of which missed the mark entirely. Some blamed burnout. Others hinted at a new health issue. One even suggested marital strain, citing outdated body language footage from 3 years ago. None of them considered the possibility that the royal couple, already balancing the future of the monarchy on their shoulders, would dare to start again. That they would choose, in the midst of their most critical moment as public figures, to return to the private, vulnerable space of new parenthood. And yet, that's exactly what they had done. The moment of truth arrived not with fanfare, but with intimacy. In the privacy of their home, away from the blinding scrutiny of royal tradition, Catherine discovered she was pregnant. It was early morning, the children still asleep, the London sky just beginning to soften with light. The news, confirmed by a second and then third test, as if reality needed verifying, struck her not with fear or confusion, but with a deep, steady calm. She waited to tell William, not because she feared his reaction, but because she wanted it to be right. She knew him. Knew that beneath his composure was a man shaped by loss and love, a man who had once promised himself that he would give his children a life radically different from the one he'd known. When she finally shared the news, his reaction was one of stunned silence. William, rarely at a loss for words, simply took her hands, searching her eyes for the kind of certainty that words couldn't give. And when he found it, the quiet, unshakable resolve in her gaze. He simply pulled her into an embrace and held on. For a long time, they said nothing. There were no plans made, no questions asked. Just the shared understanding that this baby, unexpected as they might have been, was already deeply loved. But love, in the royal world, comes with layers. It's not just a private matter, it's a public reckoning. With every pregnancy, every child, the scrutiny deepens. Every choice, from names to nurseries to nannies, becomes a matter of national interest. And in Catherine's case, the stakes were even higher. Because this pregnancy was different. She was older now. Her past pregnancies had been riddled with hyperemesis gravidarum, a severe and debilitating condition that left her bedridden for weeks. The toll on her body and spirit had been immense. After Prince Louis, she had privately confided to friends that she wasn't sure she could go through it again. And yet here she was, daring once more to walk that line between physical suffering and emotional reward. But more than that, more than the medical risk or public fascination, was the weight of symbolism. A fourth baby in a world where royal families were shrinking, where even monarchies themselves were being questioned and modernized, felt almost defiant. Was this a political move? A symbolic gesture to project stability and continuity? Or simply a couple's quiet desire to grow their family in peace? The answer wasn't simple, it was all of it. At its core, this pregnancy wasn't about legacy or optics. It wasn't about headlines or approval ratings. It was about a man and a woman who had weathered storms most couldn't imagine. A couple who had carried the burden of public duty while mourning private griefs. Who had made sacrifices in silence, endured betrayal with grace, and chosen, again and again, to put love before resentment. It was about giving their children one more sibling, one more ally in the world they were being born into, one more heart to love and be loved by. And yet, as word began to spread behind the scenes, not everyone saw it that way. Some members of the firm were caught off guard and not entirely pleased. A fourth child meant more attention on the Wales family, further diminishing the relevance of the lesser royals. It also meant more public scrutiny, more questions about costs, roles, succession. In a family where hierarchy is everything, another addition inevitably reshuffles power, even if only in perception. Queen Camilla, sources say, was polite but strained in her response. She congratulated them warmly in public, but behind closed doors was said to have raised her eyebrows at the timing. King Charles, more introspective than reactive, reportedly took the news with quiet pride, but expressed concern about Catherine's health. It was Princess and who offered the most authentic response, a single, dry comment overheard by a footman. "Well, that'll shake the bloody press up, won't it?" And shake them it did. As rumors began to leak through carefully placed palace sources, the media machine roared to life. Paparazzi staked out hospitals and fashion houses. Online forums exploded with baby name predictions. Social media was ablaze with debates, some thrilled by the expansion of the family, others decrying the cost and symbolism in an economically fragile Britain. But through it all, William and Catherine stayed silent. Not out of fear, but out of clarity. They knew what this baby meant to them. They knew why they had chosen to say yes to another child. And they knew, more than anyone, how precious and how fleeting the moments of early life could be. This wasn't about headlines. This was about heartbeats. So they waited, planned, dreamed, held their children close, smiled over morning tea, and watched, day by day, as Catherine's body once again began the sacred work of building life. And now, after months of mystery, speculation, and cautious hope, the world would finally know. The announcement would not come with trumpets or balcony appearances. It would arrive with the same grace that has defined their every step. Understated, thoughtful, and deeply human. But what would follow? Well, that no one could predict. Because behind the smiles, behind the soft-toned statements soon to grace social feeds and news tickers across the globe, is a story far richer and more complicated than anyone suspects. One filled with conflict, loyalty, sacrifice, and redemption. A story that stretches far beyond two parents and a baby bump. This is not just the tale of a fourth royal child. This is the unfolding of a new chapter in the monarchy, one born not from duty, but from courage. Not from protocol, but from love. And it's only just beginning. The public image of William and Catherine, Prince and Princess of Wales, is often one of serene perfection. Composed smiles, well-behaved children, poised engagements, and a schedule run with the precision of a Swiss watch. But behind the carefully orchestrated appearances and perfectly timed waves, there is a real family, navigating real life, just as fraught and complicated as any other, only magnified under the scrutiny of a global lens. Kensington Palace, to the casual observer, appears as the picture of tradition and splendor. But for the Wales family, it has always been a home first. Its grand architecture may suggest formality, but inside its private quarters, it is full of the laughter of children, the shuffle of busy feet, and the quiet murmur of everyday conversations that define a family's life. In the months leading up to the announcement, everything seemed, at least outwardly, blissfully ordinary. George had taken to fencing lessons, showing a surprising knack for discipline and precision. Charlotte was thriving at school, often taking charge in group activities with a calm authority that echoed her mother's. Louis, the youngest, continued to charm everyone with his impulsive humor and boundless energy, often stealing the spotlight during royal outings without even trying. Their days were filled with morning school runs, afternoon walks through Hyde Park, art projects spread out over the drawing room floor, and bedtime stories read in cozy corners under warm lamps. William and Catherine split their duties with a rhythm born out of years of teamwork. One might handle a school meeting while the other met with the charity patronage they'd long supported. And when they reunited each evening, it was rarely with talk of royal obligations. Instead, they cherished the smaller things. What the kids had learned that day, which vegetable Louis had finally agreed to try, and whether Catherine's homemade chicken pie had topped the week before's effort. But nestled within that sense of routine was a subtle shift. It was almost imperceptible at first, like a change in air pressure before a storm. A look exchanged a little longer than necessary. A conversation that trailed off into silence. A moment of stillness where once there had been only motion. Those closest to the couple began to notice a new kind of quiet between them, not of distance, but of thought. Catherine, though always deeply involved in her work and family, had begun withdrawing slightly from her public-facing obligations. Some chalked it up to exhaustion. Others assumed it was the aftermath of a difficult year, one that saw the monarchy weather an increasingly divided public opinion and internal fractures that refused to fully heal. In truth, it was neither fatigue nor politics. Catherine was thinking. In the stillness of evening, after the children were tucked into bed and the staff had retreated, she would sometimes linger by the nursery doors, listening to the gentle cadence of their breathing. She would press her palm against the wooden frame and close her eyes, as if committing the moment to memory, as if trying to decide whether her heart had one more room left to open. William saw it too. He'd watch her in those moments, not intruding, not speaking, just there. And when she turned and met his gaze, there was always a question lingering between them. Not one of fear, but one of possibility. They never spoke of it outright at first. Perhaps it was the unspoken rules of royal life, the sense that every major decision must be strategized, approved, and weighted down by tradition before it is even considered. But also, perhaps, it was something more human, a sense that this choice, unlike public speeches or political alliances, was entirely their own. And they weren't ready to break the spell of maybe by speaking it out loud. In their quiet moments, the world faded away. Catherine would sometimes wake up early, long before the children stirred, and sit in the small conservatory overlooking the palace gardens. It had become her sacred space, a place where duty didn't follow her like a shadow. There, with a cup of tea and the occasional notebook in hand, she wrote. Not reports or speeches, but personal thoughts. Journals filled with fragments of emotion, sketches of her children, and quiet musings on what it meant to be a mother, a princess, a woman stepping into middle age under a microscope. She didn't always share these writings with William, but he knew of them. He respected the space they gave her. It was part of what made their marriage so enduring, a respect for each other's inner worlds. And while the couple had never explicitly said they were done having children, the assumption had long been there. Louis was growing up fast. The older two were entering crucial phases of education and social development. Catherine had begun to take on larger roles within the royal family, stepping into a more commanding position as the future queen. William, too, was becoming increasingly involved in preparing for his eventual kingship. Everything pointed to a couple moving forward, not circling back. But assumptions don't always match the quiet pull of the heart. There were subtle moments that betrayed their internal reflections. A family walk through Sandringham during the autumn had seen Catherine pause as she passed a cradle-shaped sculpture in the gardens, a piece she'd walked by 100 times before. But this time, she lingered, her fingers grazing its edge. George noticed and asked if it reminded her of baby times. Catherine smiled softly, ruffled his hair, and didn't answer. Then came the trip to Scotland, where the family stayed at Balmoral for a brief holiday. It was there that William and Catherine found their clearest moment of clarity. Removed from the routines of palace life, surrounded by moors and mountains, and with no royal calendar dictating their every move, they were simply a family. One evening, while the children played hide-and-seek near the old stables, Catherine and William sat by the fire in one of the estate's more secluded drawing rooms. The conversation meandered, as it often did, through everything from Charlotte's painting skills to the state of the world. But eventually, it landed where it had been circling for weeks, on the idea of a new child. There were no grand declarations, no romantic pleas or dramatic tension. Just a question asked gently by Catherine. Do you ever feel like we're not quite finished? William looked at her, really looked. And in that moment, the man who had buried a mother too young, who had watched his brother become a stranger, and who had carried the weight of a kingdom on his shoulders, allowed himself a different kind of vulnerability. Yes, he said, I do. They didn't need to say more. From that moment on, the atmosphere inside Kensington began to shift. Not in obvious ways. They were still fulfilling their duties, still managing their schedules, still shielding their children from the glare of speculation. But within their home, there was a renewed sense of intimacy, a rekindled excitement, a softness. The storm hadn't come yet, but the air was different, charged with meaning, filled with possibility. And somewhere in the stillness of that palace, something new had begun. By the time the world began to notice Catherine's prolonged absence from the public eye, the speculation had already started spiraling. In the royal world, silence is rarely benign. It becomes an echo chamber for anxiety, a vacuum that begs to be filled. And when Catherine, who had long been a dependable fixture on the royal calendar, known for her unshakable grace, her punctuality, her seemingly boundless energy, began missing engagements without clear explanation, the media didn't hesitate to question everything. Whispers turned into headlines. Where is Catherine? Was she unwell again? Was this something more serious? Did it have anything to do with her past health issues? Was it political? Was it personal? Few remembered the ordeal she had faced during her past pregnancies. Most forgot, or perhaps never understood, just how brutal her experiences with hyperemesis gravidarum had been. To the public, she had always made motherhood look seamless, appearing in polished heels and bright dresses just hours after giving birth, smiling with poise while photographers clicked away like it was any ordinary afternoon. But behind that veneer of control was a woman who had spent weeks at a time violently ill, unable to keep down food or water, weakened to the point of near hospitalization. Hyperemesis gravidarum isn't just severe morning sickness. It is a debilitating condition, one that causes rapid weight loss, electrolyte imbalance, and in extreme cases, damage to internal organs. During her pregnancy with Prince George, Catherine had been hospitalized early on. With Charlotte, the condition returned, though she managed it privately. And when Louis came along, it was no different. Each time, she braved through it silently, behind closed doors, with only fragments of her reality leaking into the public narrative. That reality was one of sacrifice. Each pregnancy had taken its toll on her body, and not just physically. Emotionally, she had shouldered the pain alone for long stretches while William maintained royal appearances, often feeling torn between duty and love. It had been the hardest part of their journey together, those weeks when Catherine was unable to rise from bed, unable to smile through the pain, unable even to keep her eyes open for longer than a few moments. It terrified William, and it haunted her. So when 2024 began with yet another withdrawal from public life, it wasn't without emotional baggage. Only a few people knew the truth. The doctors, of course, a handful of trusted palace aides, and William, who once again found himself in the role of quiet sentinel, protecting not just his wife's privacy, but her dignity, her strength, her vulnerability. This time, however, the situation was more complex. Catherine was older. She was entering her early 40s, and while age alone didn't preclude a healthy pregnancy, it did increase the risks. Doctors were cautious. The symptoms returned early and with a vengeance. The nausea was unrelenting. There were days she couldn't speak without retching. Nights where even the scent of food would send her fleeing from a room. For drips were administered at home. Meals were monitored. The staff was rotated to limit exposure and preserve confidentiality. But through it all, Catherine never once considered stepping back from the decision they had made. There was, inside her, a clarity, a sense of purpose not born out of duty, but from the deep, unshakable maternal instinct that had guided her from the very first moment she held George in her arms. This pregnancy, unexpected as it had been, felt necessary. Not because it would bring joy to the public or bolster the monarchy's image, but because she wanted this child. They both did. Still, that didn't make it easy. William was deeply affected. He had long suppressed the trauma of watching his wife suffer through previous pregnancies. Each time, it had aged him in ways he rarely let on. This time it was worse. The added pressure of royal duty, his father's transition into kingship, the continued fallout with Harry, it all converged at once. And now, the woman he loved most was enduring hell in silence, just rooms away from where the world expected him to smile and wave. He spent more time at home than usual. Canceled engagements. Rescheduled meetings. For William, family has always come first, a value inherited from his mother, Diana, whose own experience with royal life was marked by emotional abandonment and institutional coldness. He refused to repeat those mistakes. Catherine noticed. She felt the weight he was carrying and did her best to reassure him, even through her pain. In moments when she felt well enough to speak, she and William would sit together in the nursery, remembering the early days with George, then Charlotte, and finally Louis. Each child brought up different emotions: laughter, exhaustion, fear, pride. They relived moments like old photographs, tracing the edges of their memory together. The sleepless nights, the baby giggles, the tiny first steps down the palace hallway. And yet, amid the memories, was the looming shadow of uncertainty. The press was circling. The public was growing impatient. Speculation about her disappearance grew nastier. Anonymous sources fed rumors to tabloids, some suggesting marital issues, others claiming a secret health crisis. A few went as far as to speculate about the couple separating, a claim that cut deeply for Catherine, who had always gone out of her way to build an image of unity with her husband. Still, they said nothing. Every time William considered releasing a statement, Catherine gently reminded him of the importance of preserving space for their child. Not just physical space, but emotional and spiritual space. Space to grow without noise, without cameras, without judgment. But even silence has its price. During one particularly bad week in February, Catherine was bedridden for 5 days. Her condition worsened so rapidly that William insisted a medical team remain on-site 24/7. Nurses rotated in shifts. Aides shielded the wing of the palace from any external intrusion. The children were kept upstairs and told that Mummy was just very tired. But children sense more than they are told. Charlotte, ever observant, would often peer into the hallway where her mother rested, holding a small drawing she'd made or a flower plucked from the garden. She never crossed the threshold unless invited. She didn't need to. Her presence was enough. Her silent offerings lined Catherine's bedside table. Hand-scribbled notes, clumsy paper hearts, little symbols of a love too big for words. George handled it differently. He asked questions. Hard questions. Was Mummy okay? Was the baby okay? Would she be better soon? William answered each one as best as he could, careful never to lie, but also never to frighten. George, who had begun to understand the pressure his parents were under, took it upon himself to help. Keeping Louis distracted, managing his own homework without reminders, occasionally making breakfast when the staff stepped away. Louis, the youngest, knew the least but felt the most. He was clingy, emotional, easily upset. He didn't understand why Mummy wasn't chasing him around the garden or helping him build forts in the drawing room. When she did have enough strength to appear, even briefly, his face would light up like sunrise. These were the moments that anchored Catherine through the storm. Not the doctor's updates, not the palace's containment strategy, but the quiet resilience of her children, the unwavering presence of her husband, the hum of life continuing just outside her door, waiting for her to return. And slowly, things began to improve. Her condition, while not gone, stabilized. The nausea didn't vanish, but it lessened in intensity. She began to regain weight. Her skin, once pale and sallow, began to glow with renewed strength. Small walks returned, then tea on the terrace, then longer conversations at the dinner table. Eventually, laughter returned, soft at first, then louder, full-bodied, unrestrained. But even as Catherine's health improved, the shadow of 2024 lingered. The monarchy was in flux. King Charles, though competent, faced increasing pressure to modernize or risk irrelevance. The public was skeptical. The institution, wounded by scandals and strained relations, was desperate for unity, for hope, for some sign that its future wasn't just ceremonial, but real and beating. And in the most unexpected way, Catherine's pregnancy became just that. A heartbeat, a symbol, a reminder that even within the rigid structure of royal life, humanity could still flourish. That a family still growing was a nation still hoping. That legacy wasn't just about titles or succession, but about love, enduring, selfless, unwavering love. As spring approached, and the first public whispers of a royal announcement began to stir, the world didn't yet know the full story. But it would soon. It happened on a morning that looked like any other. The sun had barely broken through the veil of clouds over Kensington Palace, casting a soft golden hue across the frost-covered gardens. The house was quiet, the kind of stillness that only exists before the clamor of little feet and the chorus of breakfast chatter take over. Catherine stood alone in the en-suite bathroom, barefoot on the cold tile floor, clutching a small plastic stick in one hand and bracing herself with the other on the marble sink. It wasn't the first time she'd stood there with a pregnancy test in hand, but this time felt different. She hadn't told William yet, not even hinted at the possibility. It was too soon, too uncertain, and she hadn't planned for this. Not now, not after everything their family had already weathered. She had chalked up the nausea and fatigue to stress, perhaps a lingering virus. But something inside her, a quiet, insistent whisper, told her otherwise. The seconds ticked by like hours. She didn't pace. She didn't fidget. She simply waited. When the result appeared, she didn't gasp. She didn't cry. She didn't even blink. She just stared at it. Positive, clear, undeniable. A fourth child. Another heartbeat. Another chapter. And then, the emotion flooded in. Not panic. Not dread. But an overwhelming wave of something older, deeper, awe. That this was happening again. That her body, after all it had been through, was still capable of creating life. That somehow, amid the demands of royal duty, the heaviness of public scrutiny, the trials of motherhood, her heart still had room for more. For a few moments, she stood frozen. Then, quietly, deliberately, she moved to the small wooden box in the drawer beside her bed. Inside were mementos, a hospital bracelet from George's birth, a lock of Charlotte's baby hair, Louis's first scribbled Mother's Day card. She placed the test beside them, gently, like placing a new stone in a sacred monument. Telling William wasn't something she wanted to rush. It took her 3 days. 3 days of watching him closely, studying the lines on his face, the way his shoulders tensed when reading the morning papers, the way he instinctively reached for her hand during moments of stillness. 3 days of searching for the right moment in a life where right moments were rarely gifted without careful planning. On the fourth morning, she found it. They were having tea in the garden. The children were inside with their tutors. The sky was clear, the air brisk, and William, for once, was completely present. No phone calls, no briefings, no royal aides hovering within earshot. Catherine reached for his hand. "There's something I want to tell you," she said softly. William looked at her with immediate focus. He could always tell when something was coming. His brow furrowed, not with fear, but with concern. "I'm pregnant," she said. The words hung in the air for a moment, fragile and weightless. His expression didn't change at first. He didn't react with the dramatic enthusiasm most might expect from such an announcement. Instead, he blinked slowly, processing, and then he smiled. Not a small, polite smile, but the kind that stretches across the soul and lights something from within. "Really?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She nodded. He looked away, briefly, as if needing to let the moment settle inside him. Then he laughed. A quiet, stunned laugh, full of disbelief and wonder. "I wasn't expecting that," he said. "Neither was I," she replied. Then came the silence again. But this time, it wasn't tense or uncertain. It was sacred. He reached for her, pulling her close. They sat together for a long while, their fingers intertwined, their tea growing cold on the table beside them. There was no rush, no royal statement to issue, no cameras, just a man and a woman, husband and wife, parents for the fourth time. Later that evening, when the children were tucked in, they walked the halls of the palace together, speaking in hushed tones about what this meant. About timing, about privacy, about how they would tell the children. But more than logistics, they spoke about dreams. William remembered the long nights after George was born, pacing the nursery floor with a squirming bundle in his arms, whispering promises he wasn't sure he could keep. He remembered Charlotte's first word, Dada, and the way it had cracked something open inside him. He remembered Louis's chaotic giggles, his tiny hands wrapped around his neck, and how nothing else in the world could compare to the feeling of being their father. "I thought we were finished," he said, not regretfully, but honestly. "I did too," Catherine replied. "But maybe we're not meant to be." They didn't tell anyone for several more weeks. It was their secret, a rare, sacred thing in a world that seldom allowed them to have anything private. For a short time, they were just two people in love, savoring the news before the world inevitably claimed it. Eventually, they informed their inner circle, the Queen's private secretary, Catherine's physician, a couple of senior aides, but they kept the circle tight. Each person told was reminded of the importance of silence. And for a time, the plan worked. But pregnancy cannot hide forever. Catherine's body began to change. She grew tired more easily. Her appetite shifted. Her wardrobe subtly adjusted. During a royal engagement in early March, a well-timed hand placed across her midsection sparked a flurry of speculation online. Still, the couple refused to confirm anything. They wanted time to prepare their children, to brace themselves for the inevitable public storm, and to settle into the emotional reality of what they had undertaken. But it wasn't just preparation they were after. It was preservation. Because this baby, in their eyes, wasn't just another royal heir. This child represented something far more profound, a statement of resilience. A choice made in love, not obligation. A chance to grow, not because they needed to, but because their hearts had made space. It was a reminder to themselves, and perhaps to the world, that life, no matter how complex, no matter how high the stakes, was still worth creating. That love, in all its forms, could still surprise, still heal, still inspire. That night, Catherine wrote in her journal, "I never thought we would be here again. But we are. And I feel peace. Deep, honest peace. No matter what the world says. No matter what they speculate or assume. This is ours." In the history of the British royal family, many moments have been carefully choreographed and delicately unveiled to the public. Engagements, weddings, births, and transitions. But the most important announcements, the truly defining moments of family life, often happen far from the public eye, in rooms filled not with courtiers but with crayons, stuffed animals, and the boundless curiosity of children. For William and Catherine, telling George, Charlotte, and Louis about the new baby was not simply an update. It was an emotional checkpoint. They knew their children would be impacted by the news in very different ways. Each child carried a unique perspective, a different understanding of what this meant for their family and for themselves. They decided to do it on a Sunday morning, a time traditionally reserved for family breakfast, games in the garden, and long, slow hours spent together away from the obligations of their public roles. The weather was cooperative, and the children, unaware of the significance of the day, were their usual animated selves. George had been organizing his toy soldiers by height. Charlotte was curled up with a book in the corner of the drawing room, and Louis was trying to stack pillows into a makeshift mountain fortress. William and Catherine waited until everyone was seated at the breakfast table. Pancakes were served, a family favorite. And there was the usual chaos of Louis spilling syrup, Charlotte reminding George of the proper way to use a knife, and William sneaking an extra slice onto Catherine's plate with a wink. When the moment felt right, Catherine gently set her fork down and glanced across the table. "There's something, Daddy, and I want to tell you," she began, her voice warm and calm. George immediately looked up, his eyes narrowing with the kind of cautious curiosity that had become increasingly common as he matured. Charlotte stopped mid-bite, and Louis paused with a strawberry halfway to his mouth. "We're going to have a baby," William said, finishing the sentence. Silence. The kind of silence that could only come from young minds racing to process unexpected information. Then, in a flurry of overlapping reactions, the table erupted. George was the first to speak. "Wait, another baby? Like a real baby?" His tone was somewhere between excitement and incredulity. "Yes," Catherine said, laughing softly. "A real baby. You're going to have a little brother or sister." George's brow furrowed for a moment, and then he looked at his parents, clearly working through a dozen thoughts. But where will they sleep? What if they cry all the time? What if Louis teaches them rude words? Louis, oblivious to the not-so-subtle jab, let out a triumphant cheer. Yes, a baby. I can teach them how to ride a scooter. He stood up on his chair, arms raised like a champion. Charlotte's reaction, however, was the most surprising. She sat very still, her face unreadable. For a moment, William and Catherine exchanged worried glances. Then Charlotte quietly placed her fork down and asked, "Is it because you thought we weren't enough?" The question landed with the weight of a stone in water. Catherine immediately reached across the table and took her daughter's hand. "Oh, sweetheart. No, not at all," she said. "You, George, and Louis are everything to us. This baby isn't coming to replace anyone. It's just a new person to love. Our love doesn't get divided, it grows." Charlotte looked down at her plate, absorbing the words in silence. William gently added, "Just like when Louis was born, and we all had to make room in our hearts. You were the best big sister then, and we know you'll be amazing again." That seemed to reach her. Charlotte nodded slowly, then smiled faintly. "Can I teach them to read?" "Of course," Catherine said. "You can be their teacher, their friend, their guide." George, still deep in thought, added, "We should probably make some rules for them. Like, no messing with my Lego, ever. And no sitting on my dog," Louis exclaimed, clearly projecting potential future conflicts. The conversation turned quickly from initial shock to practical planning. What would the baby's name be? Would it be a boy or a girl? Could they help decorate the nursery? Could the baby sleep in George's room just for one night, as Louis suggested, which immediately received a firm no from George. The energy at the table became electric. George began drafting a list of baby protocols. Charlotte ran to her room to find a baby book she'd once been gifted and never used, and Louis began speaking to a toy giraffe as if it were the newborn in training. But amid the whirlwind of reaction, what lingered for William and Catherine was the shift in atmosphere. The questions, the jokes, even the childish competitiveness, it all confirmed what they had hoped. The family would embrace this change, not resist it. Later that day, when the children were playing in the garden, William and Catherine sat on a bench beneath a sprawling elm tree and watched them. George was climbing, Charlotte was organizing a leaf hunt, and Louis was making a baby safety zone with twigs and mud. "They're going to be all right," Catherine said, a touch of relief in her voice. William nodded. "More than all right. I think they're going to love this baby as much as we do." As dusk fell, the family gathered by the fireplace, a Sunday evening tradition. Catherine, feeling stronger that day than she had in weeks, read aloud from a storybook while William wrapped an arm around her shoulders. The children sat cross-legged on cushions, their eyes fixed on the illustrations, their minds already adjusting to the idea that their family was about to grow. As she read, Catherine found herself distracted, not by the words, but by the expressions on her children's faces, open, innocent, full of wonder. And for the first time in weeks, she felt completely at peace with the unknown. The exhaustion, the nausea, the risks, they all faded beneath the simple, pure image of the five of them curled together by firelight, making space in their hearts for one more. Upstairs, later that night, she stood outside the nursery. Not the new one, not yet, but the one where each of her children had taken their first breaths in royal life. She lingered in the doorway, remembering lullabies, first teeth, sleepless nights, and first steps. Soon, there would be another cradle in that room, another tiny body wrapped in blankets, another soul to love and nurture, and this time, the whole family would be there, ready. It is often said that the past lingers in the corridors of Kensington Palace, not as ghosts, but as memories embedded in every stone, every polished floor, every ornate window that looks out onto the private gardens. For William, one presence had always loomed larger than any other, his mother, Diana. Her spirit was not just a figment of nostalgia, but an enduring compass. She shaped how he viewed the world, how he related to his wife and children, and most importantly, how he envisioned his role as a father. Her absence, profound and unyielding, remained one of the greatest emotional voids of his life. And as he faced the news of a fourth child, Diana's memory returned with a new intensity. Not as sorrow, but as quiet guidance. Catherine understood this better than anyone. From the earliest days of their courtship, she had sensed how deeply Diana's legacy was etched into William's soul. Not in the loud, performative way the media often exploited, but in the small things. The way William instinctively knelt to speak to children at eye level, the way he approached grief, the fierce protectiveness with which he shielded his family. Diana wasn't a distant royal figure to him. She was home, and her loss was not something he had moved past. It was something he had learned to live beside. It was no surprise, then, that in the days following Catherine's pregnancy revelation, much of their conversation circled back to Diana, her motherhood, her courage, her unconventional choices. They revisited old stories, paging through photo albums William hadn't opened in years. He found himself recounting childhood memories in sharper detail, describing moments long buried by time. How she used to sneak them into fast food joints, play on the floor with them, how she'd pull faces during boring royal events just to make them laugh. How, above all, she loved them with a wild, defiant force that had stood in direct contrast to the cold etiquette of the palace. "I sometimes wonder," William said during one of their private evenings, "what she would have said about all of this. About us. About the way we're raising our kids." "She would have been proud," Catherine answered without hesitation. "Not just of what you do, but who you are when no one's watching." It was more than a comforting platitude. It was the truth. Catherine had studied Diana in more ways than most would ever understand, not out of obsession, but out of deep respect. She had watched countless interviews, read old letters, listened to stories from aides, and traced the emotional blueprint Diana had carved into the royal family. She understood how much of the woman she loved, and the family they were building, had been shaped by the loss of the Princess of Wales. And as the thought of welcoming a fourth child became more tangible, Catherine felt the weight of that legacy pass into her hands. She had always wanted to be a present mother, not a ceremonial one, not just a public figure known for smiling with infants in her arms, but a mother who could offer her children what Diana had tried to offer hers: protection, affection, and emotional honesty. Her decision to have another child wasn't made lightly. She remembered the toll of previous pregnancies, the invasive scrutiny, the hyperemesis that stole weeks of her life and energy. But this time, something in her had shifted. Perhaps it was age. Perhaps it was the growing realization that time was finite. Or perhaps it was a desire to heal something unspoken. Because the truth was, Diana's loss wasn't just William's burden. It had shaped Catherine, too, as a wife, a mother, and a future queen. The idea of a fourth child felt, in some ways, like reclaiming something that had been taken from their family. A rebuke to tragedy. A reminder that life, no matter how bruised by sorrow, still finds a way to push forward. One evening, Catherine retrieved a box from her private study, a collection of letters written by Diana in the final years of her life. They had been passed down to William through a trusted aide, stored away with care. Most of them were handwritten, in Diana's unmistakable slant, full of personal thoughts, confessions, and glimpses into her hopes for her sons. William read aloud one letter neither of them had opened before. It was dated a few months before her fatal accident. In it, Diana wrote candidly about her fears for the future, about whether she would live to see her sons grow into men. She hoped they'd marry women who would love them for who they truly were. She dreamed of being a grandmother. She worried that they would be pulled too deeply into the machine of monarchy, that they would forget how to feel. "She wanted us to stay human," William said, voice thick with emotion. "Not polished, not perfect, just real." Catherine nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "And that's exactly what we're doing." That night, the idea of Diana watching over them didn't feel abstract. It felt present. It felt like something passed down, not through DNA, but through spirit. Diana had lived a life marked by conflict, compassion, and complexity, but she had also loved fiercely. That love had not died with her. It had found a new form in William, in his children, and now, in the child yet to be born. The connection to Diana became even more vivid as the couple began discussing how to honor her in this new chapter. They didn't want to replicate the past, but they did want to preserve the emotional truth she had fought so hard to keep alive. One idea was floated. Not finalized, not confirmed, but considered with care. If the baby were a girl, would they consider the name Diana as a middle name? It was a bold proposition, one that carried as much risk as sentiment. The media would explode. Comparisons would be endless. But the intent was pure. It wouldn't be for headlines. It would be for family. George, Charlotte, and Louis already knew of their grandmother. Though they had never met her, Diana had been woven into their childhood like a bedtime story, a figure of beauty and bravery who had once loved their father fiercely. Charlotte, in particular, had taken to Diana's legacy with a sense of ownership. She would often ask to look at old pictures, sometimes mimicking Diana's fashion choices in playful ways. One day, she pointed to a photo of Diana holding baby Harry and asked, "Did she love Daddy like I love you?" "She loved him even more," Catherine replied, her voice catching. It was in these quiet, unremarkable moments that the deeper truth of their decision emerged. This fourth child would be born into a world that already bore the scars of history, a family shaped by divorce, loss, betrayal, and redemption. But unlike those who had come before, this baby would arrive into a family that had fought for wholeness, a family that had not tried to escape its past, but had made peace with it. In the weeks that followed, Catherine's connection to Diana seemed to deepen. She began working more closely with charities Diana had once supported, revisiting causes that had long been important to her: mental health, youth homelessness, mothers in crisis. Not as a gesture of tribute, but as an act of continuity. William supported her in every step. He too saw the significance of blending past and present, of allowing the legacy of Diana to live, not in marble statues or television specials, but in small, daily acts of love. As Catherine's body changed, so too did their resolve. They weren't just growing their family. They were healing it. They were rewriting the narrative that loss had written for them. They were offering their children, and themselves, a chance to expand the definition of love. And in doing so, they were doing something Diana had always dreamed of, but never got to see fully realized. They were becoming whole. The British monarchy is often described as a well-oiled machine, driven by centuries of tradition, powered by discretion, and governed by an invisible hierarchy that knows no rest. But for all its calculated precision, its ritualistic schedules, and its polished appearances, there is one force it struggles to control: unpredictability born from personal decisions. And when William and Catherine confirmed they were expecting a fourth child, the wheels within the royal institution, affectionately and, at times, disdainfully referred to as the firm, began to spin wildly in every direction. At first, there was disbelief. Even within the tightest royal circles, the idea of the Prince and Princess of Wales choosing to expand their family, at a time when the monarchy was navigating one of its most uncertain chapters, was seen as not only unexpected, but borderline disruptive. With King Charles just over a year into his reign and the memory of Queen Elizabeth II still casting a long shadow, the firm had spent months recalibrating its priorities: slimmed down roles, strategic PR overhauls, modernized public messaging, and, crucially, limiting distractions. A new baby didn't fit into the plan. It wasn't on the spreadsheet. It wasn't part of the press strategy. It was, for lack of a better term, a wild card. Behind closed doors, palace aides scrambled. There were whispers through encrypted messaging channels, emails marked urgent, confidential. Unscheduled meetings sprang up across Clarence House, Sandringham, and Buckingham Palace. Senior advisors to the king began crafting contingency plans, not for a crisis, but for the kind of emotionally charged, highly visible story that could disrupt months of narrative control. The announcement hadn't even gone public yet, and already, the system was bracing for impact. The firm operates on an ancient code, unspoken, but rigorously observed. Every royal movement is carefully measured: when to speak, when to smile, when to act. And at its core lies one sacred principle: appearances matter more than emotion. Which is why personal decisions, pregnancies, marriages, illnesses, are never purely personal. They are reviewed, dissected, scheduled, and, in some cases, softened for public consumption. William and Catherine's decision to grow their family was something they had intentionally kept out of the monarchy's machinery. It was a quiet act of self-governance. A couple choosing intimacy over consultation, love over logistics. And that autonomy unsettled the structure. At the heart of the ripple effect was King Charles. He had only recently begun settling into his role as monarch, walking a narrow path between honoring his late mother's legacy and asserting his own vision. The transition had not been seamless. Critics questioned his relevance. Commonwealth nations debated republicanism. The royal brand, once buoyed by the Queen's unassailable dignity, now found itself wobbling under the weight of expectation and internal strain. And then came the pregnancy news. According to a senior palace insider, Charles received the information through a personal note from William, hand-delivered by a trusted aide. The message was brief, respectful, but direct. He and Catherine were expecting again. They hoped for support, but they were prepared to face public scrutiny. The decision had been made with clarity and mutual love. Charles reportedly read the note twice before setting it down, sighing through his nose and asking for tea. His reaction, as described by those present, was a complex blend of paternal affection, political calculation, and deep concern. He was not angry, far from it, but he was keenly aware of what it meant for the monarchy. A new baby meant attention diverted. Headlines shifted. A media frenzy. Questions about succession and finances. It meant revisiting the royal line, updating biographies, and expanding the protective cocoon of press management around the Wales family. More importantly, it meant that William and Catherine were, once again, stepping into a level of public adoration that far outshined that of the current king. And that reality was hard to ignore. Still, Charles chose grace. In private, he called William and offered his congratulations. He expressed concern for Catherine's health and inquired about the children's reactions. He acknowledged the magnitude of the decision. But there was a pause at the end of the call, a hesitation that hung between father and son. "You know what this means, don't you?" Charles asked. William did. But he said nothing. He didn't need to. The broader royal family had its own set of reactions. Queen Camilla, though cordial in public, reportedly struggled with the implications. According to palace staff, she raised concerns about messaging and how the pregnancy might distract from the king's work. In a conversation with aides, she was overheard asking whether the couple had considered what it would mean to the institution, a question that sparked uncomfortable glances. Princess, and ever the pragmatist, had little to say beyond a dry, "Well, they've always done things their way. Why stop now?" She made no attempts to hide her skepticism, but showed no signs of disapproval either. Other royals, lesser known but still seated in the web of titles and expectations, expressed surprise and confusion. The Countess of Wessex reportedly found out through a news leak. The Duke of Gloucester was said to be delighted, but baffled. There were questions from extended family members about how this might affect budget allocations, residences, even ceremonial duties. The firm, internally, was less sentimental. Teams within the communications office immediately began drafting hypothetical statements, preparing crisis management strategies in case of leaks, and organizing press briefings under a need-to-know policy. Behind the scenes, discussions turned to how this pregnancy could be leveraged, not cynically, but strategically, to reinvigorate public interest in the royal family. Could this be framed as a story of renewal? Could it remind the public of the monarchy's human side? Could it soften criticism around the institution's relevance? Some advisors thought so. Others warned of overexposure. The image of William and Catherine had always been the crown jewel of the monarchy's modern chapter, polished, relatable, emotionally accessible. But even jewels can be mishandled. A fourth baby wasn't just a personal joy, it was a branding challenge. Meanwhile, security teams quietly revised protocol. A new child meant an expanded radius of protection. New medical staff were briefed. Residences were reviewed for modifications. Schedules were shifted to accommodate prenatal care and minimize public strain. Even wardrobe stylists were alerted Catherine's appearance, especially during this time, would carry symbolic weight. Through it all, William and Catherine remained calm. They had expected resistance, or at the very least, turbulence. But what they hadn't anticipated was the subtle undercurrent of fear within the institution. Not fear of scandal, but fear of transformation. Because this baby, in many ways, represented change. Not the kind that disrupts with noise, but the kind that quietly rewrites narratives. It was a return to the idea that the monarchy could still be organic, that it could grow not just through marriage and ceremony, but through love and natural family evolution. That royals could be, at their core, human, with hopes, longings, and spontaneous decisions. It was a risk, yes, but it was a risk they were willing to take. And within the palace, for all its rigidity and caution, there was an emerging realization that maybe, just maybe, this unexpected pregnancy wasn't a distraction from the royal mission. Maybe it was the royal mission to remind the world that amid all the crowns, titles, and ancient rituals, the most powerful story the monarchy could tell was that of a family still choosing to love, still choosing to grow, and still choosing to believe in the future. The moment the news leaked, and it did leak, as it always does, the media reacted like sharks tasting blood in the water. One whisper, one off-the-record comment from an insider who likely didn't realize the magnitude of what they were saying, was all it took. The speculation ignited like wildfire, moving from the innermost royal circles to the tabloid desks, from social media whispers to full-blown headlines. And once it started, there was no pulling it back. At first, the coverage was cautious. A few blogs and royal watchers hinted at a major shift within the Wales household. A royal photographer posted a cryptic comment under an older photo of Catherine, saying, "I suspect we'll be seeing a glow soon." Then came a speculative article in a mid-tier paper suggesting Catherine's recent absence from public engagements might not be health-related in the way previously assumed. Perhaps something else was underway. Something joyful. The palace, as expected, neither confirmed nor denied the growing rumors. That silence only fed the storm. Within 24 hours, every major UK newspaper had a royal correspondent chasing the story. Kensington Palace was bombarded with calls, requests for comment, and offers for exclusive, tasteful coverage. Some outlets pleaded, others threatened, and still, the official statement did not come. Instead, journalists began digging. Archived photographs were examined with forensic scrutiny. One from a charity visit weeks prior, where Catherine had subtly placed a hand over her abdomen, was suddenly trending again. Fashion analysts claimed her coat was tailored differently, looser, layered, strategic. Body language experts weighed in on William's gestures, citing his protective stance as possible proof of a hidden secret. Conspiracy theories flourished. And then came the big hit. A foreign tabloid, unburdened by UK press laws and fueled by a history of royal sensationalism, published a front-page story titled, "Is Kate expecting baby number 4?" The article claimed an unnamed source from within the palace had confirmed the pregnancy, citing changes in Catherine's routine, enhanced security around their private quarters, and the conspicuous absence of any alcohol at a recent family function. The story caught fire. The UK press, now emboldened by the overseas breach, pounced. Headlines screamed across the tabloids, "Royal baby on the way? Is this the biggest royal surprise yet? Duchess disappears and returns with a bump?" News channels ran continuous coverage. Panels of royal commentators were assembled, and talk show hosts devoted entire segments to the mystery. Was it true? If so, why the secrecy? Why now? The media war had begun. Opinion pieces were divided. Some hailed the possibility as a heartwarming turn of events, a reminder of the monarchy's human side. They painted William and Catherine as loving parents expanding their family in defiance of stress and public expectation. Others, less kind, called it an irresponsible distraction, a PR stunt, aimed at shifting focus away from growing questions around the royal finances and ongoing rifts within the family. A few accused them of hypocrisy, citing past interviews where they hinted their family felt complete. Meanwhile, social media fractured in its typical way. On Instagram, waves of adoration poured in. Fans posted tribute videos, mashups of baby moments, and gushed over the idea of baby Wales number 4. Twitter, more cynical by nature, tore into the family dynamics, questioning timing, motives, and even dragging Harry and Meghan back into the conversation, despite the couple having nothing to do with it. One user posted, "Just when Meghan's podcast rumors start heating up, suddenly a surprise royal baby? Classic distraction technique." Another quipped, "Harry writes a book. Kate writes a birth plan." It wasn't long before the Sussex comparisons became a focal point in media coverage. Editors seized the opportunity to revive an old but profitable narrative, Wales versus Sussexes. And as usual, it worked. Articles appeared with titles like, "While Meghan courts Hollywood, Kate grows the monarchy." Others flipped the script. "Catherine follows Meghan's footsteps with baby number 4. Coincidence or competition?" The speculative games became a theater, and the audience couldn't look away. What was lost in the noise, however, was the simple truth. A family had made a deeply personal decision, and now they were being forced to explain it to the world before they were ready. Kensington Palace, under growing pressure, convened several emergency communications meetings. Advisors debated the merits of continuing to withhold confirmation. They weighed the risk of allowing inaccurate narratives to fester against the desire to protect Catherine's well-being. Eventually, the couple, ever composed under pressure, decided they would respond on their terms. They drafted the announcement personally. No formal statement from a palace spokesperson. No press conference. Just a single, elegantly written post, a photo accompanied by a message, to be shared on their official social media account. The photo showed William and Catherine walking hand in hand with their children through a sun-dappled woodland path, their backs to the camera. Catherine's coat was open just enough to show the unmistakable curve of her growing stomach. The caption read, "A new adventure begins. Our hearts are full, and our family will soon grow once more. We are grateful for your love and support during this special time. W&C." It was subtle, elegant, undeniably human, and it sent the internet into meltdown. Within minutes, the post had gone viral. News channels broke into programming to show the image. Online reactions poured in by the millions. Celebrities, public figures, and even some foreign heads of state commented with congratulations. Hashtags like #RoyalBaby4, #WalesFamily, and #Kate and William trended globally for 2 straight days. The public, on the whole, reacted with enthusiasm. People were hungry for a feel-good story, and this, despite the royal baggage, felt genuine. A family expecting a child. A couple still very much in love. A woman stepping once again into the sacred challenge of motherhood. But beneath the celebration, tension still simmered. Journalists kept digging. Commentators speculated about the baby's gender, name, and place in the line of succession. Was this child a sign that William was ready to take on more responsibility? Was Catherine retreating from public life permanently? What did this mean for the monarchy? And then there were the tabloids, relentless as ever, who began publishing paparazzi shots, dissecting body language, analyzing Catherine's diet, and publishing speculative timelines about her due date. Some outlets went so far as to commission anonymous doctors to give expert opinions based on nothing more than photos. William was furious, not outwardly, not in a way that the press could report, but behind the palace gates, those closest to him said he was incandescent. It wasn't just about Catherine. Though her well-being was his greatest concern, it was about the pattern, the same cycle that had haunted his mother, the same intrusions that had fractured his relationship with his brother, the same invasive frenzy that never seemed to learn restraint. And yet, as they had done time and again, William and Catherine weathered it with quiet strength. They focused on their children. They leaned on each other. And, when necessary, they leaned on the small circle of trusted friends who had stood by them long before titles and tiaras became part of their lives. Through it all, Catherine stayed remarkably calm. She refused to let the noise dictate her joy. She refused to hide behind palace walls. Instead, she took short walks in the garden, spent time with the children, continued writing in her journal, and reminded herself, every morning, that this baby, this tiny life, was worth every storm. She knew what came next wouldn't be easy, but she also knew she wasn't facing it alone.